Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We're going to start the meeting now. Looking at the working program, we're still about a day behind. And so in efforts to have our, to be able to complete the agenda, we're going to keep the speaking time limited for interventions, where for observer parties, it will be limited at 2 minutes, and for observer organizations, it'll be limited at 1 minute. And I would really encourage folks to focus on the recommendations in the document, provide input and comments and feedback on the recommendations in the document. I spoke with the Secretariat this morning. They are, we can save the thanks for the Secretariat to for the preparation of the document, and I hope Switzerland is okay with us saving thanks for hosting this meeting. We can do all of that at the end when we do closing remarks and making general statements. And if we can, strictly business and focus on the recommendations in the document, and we can see where we are at noon and reassess and see if we need to make additional alterations. And so with that, we resume the agenda with document number 39.2, IAIF, and I turn the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the document.
Thank you, Chair. The document provides an update and summary of key activities implemented by IAIF. It includes success stories from parties, operational support, the revised and updated toolkit and indicator framework, and information on various activities supported at national, regional, and global level. Further details are available in the biannual report for 2021-2022, which has also been made available as Information Document 11. The new IAIF website and the various social media accounts in English, Spanish, and French are also updated regularly, and IAIF organized side events on 7 and 8 of November to highlight its work. The European Union, France, Germany, Monaco, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America are thanked for their contributions to the IAIF strategic program, which is now coming to a close. Contributions from the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of China, Norway, Switzerland, and the United States of America to the Secretariat also supported IAIF's work. IAIF will now initiate the implementation of the IAIF Vision 2030 and its associated Strategic Action Plan 2023-2026. The Secretariat is in discussions to explore possible contributions as anticipated by Decision 1927 and in the provisions of paragraph 20 in Resolution Conf 11.3 Rev Cop 19. The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is thanked for its contributions to the vision, and the United States of America for the funds directed to IAIF from their excess contribution to CITES. The recommendations are included in paragraph 31A to D of the document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat, and I open the floor to comments from the Standing Committee. Open the floor to comments from observer parties. Open the floor to comments from observer organizations. The Standing Committee agrees to the recommendations set out in document 39.1. I'm sorry. The Standing Committee agrees to the recommendations set out in document 39.2, paragraph 31. With that, I conclude this item, and we move to item number 39.4, Wildlife Crime Enforcement Support in West and Central Africa. I give the floor to the Secretariat, Nigeria, to introduce the document. Nigeria, you have the floor. Nigeria, you have the floor to introduce the document.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm bringing the report of the Intersessional Working Group on Wildlife Crime Enforcement Support in West and Central Africa to the CITES Standing Committee. At COP19, the Conference of Parties adopted Decision 19.88 on wildlife crime enforcement support in West and Central Africa, which included the establishment of a working group. Nigeria was proud to take the position as chair of this important working group. The report was prepared by Nigeria on behalf of the working group and highlights the work of the working group in accordance with its mandate established at SC 76 to consider Decision 19.88, paragraphs A and B. In accordance with the Decision 19.88, the working group was mandated to A, make recommendations on the development and adoption of procedures that will promote enhanced collaboration between source, transit, and consumer countries, in particular, to promote regular communication between source, transit, and consumer countries. B, consider whether the establishment and administration of a CITES enforcement fund or other mechanisms that could provide targeted and sustainable financial support to combat wildlife crime is needed. The discussions of the working group were supported by a background document available as Annex 1 that was distributed to members to guide discussions on 18th May 2023. The working group conducted its work via email and organized an online meeting in July to progress its work. Full details of the meeting are available in Annex 2. I will provide a summary of the discussions for the consideration of the Standing Committee, and I take the opportunity to thank all working group representatives for their active engagement in the discussions, as well as to Wabiled for supporting the English and French interpretation during the online meeting. Regarding promoting collaboration between source, transit, and consumer countries, in accordance with Decision 19.88, paragraph A, the working group discussed several matters to make recommendations on the development and adoption of procedures that will promote enhanced collaboration, in particular, to promote regular communication. The working group agreed existing mechanisms and platforms to promote collaboration between source, transit, and destination countries are available and should be increasingly and better used. Further details are available in the document, and the suggestions of the working group are included in paragraph 8A to C. Regarding the establishment and administration of a CITES enforcement fund or other mechanisms in accordance with Decision 19.88, paragraph B, the working group considered the need for establishment and administration of a CITES enforcement fund or other mechanisms that could provide targeted and sustainable financial support. It also discussed if existing financial mechanisms are sufficient and if they are adequately providing the needed support, as well as new opportunities and sources of funding that could be explored in the execution of CITES programs. The working group concluded that at this stage, there is no need to create an additional funding mechanism and that existing mechanisms and initiatives should be utilized. However, working group members stressed that additional funding is needed and that there is a lack of awareness of the support available from existing initiatives and funding opportunities, as well as how to reach out to them for support or to access funds. Further details are available in the document, and the conclusions in this regard are included in paragraph 11A to D. To conclude, discussions relevant to decision 19.88 paragraph A have been completed. However, further discussion is needed regarding decision 19.88 paragraph B. The working group therefore proposes to extend its mandate to continue discussions on decision 19.88 paragraph B, including through the issuance of a questionnaire available in Annex 3, and to report back to SC 78. The Standing Committee is invited to note the discussions of the working group and make suggestions. Request the working group continue its discussion with respect to decision 19.88 paragraph B. Request the working group to finalize the questionnaire in Annex 3. Request the CITES Secretariat to issue a notification to parties regarding existing access to finance mechanisms for CITES enforcement. Request the working group to report on the implementation of decision 19.88 paragraph B to the 78th meeting of the CITES Standing Committee. The recommendations of the working group are available in paragraph A to E. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Nigeria. I give the floor to standing committee members for comments on the document. Give the floor to observer parties for comments on the document. And China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China would like to take this opportunity to encourage enforcement, cooperation among source, transit, and consumer countries. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, China. I give the floor to Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to commend the work of the working group and take note of the progress made. We agree that further discussion could be helpful to understand the difficulties with the access to existing funding mechanisms. As the questionnaire has not yet been discussed in the working group, we would suggest modifying recommendation C as follows. Request the working group to consider and, if needed, finalize the questionnaire and then further. Thank you.
Thank you, Belgium. I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. We thank the Working Group on Wildlife Crime Enforcement support in West and Central Africa for their work on this paper. We strongly endorse endeavours to enhance collaboration across source, transit and consumer countries. Such cooperation is pivotal in establishing a robust deterrence against illegal wildlife trade. The document rightly highlights the existence of numerous mechanisms that are in place to support these efforts. And whilst we agree that parties should make greater use of existing platforms, it might also be helpful to consider why, despite these mechanisms being in place, collaboration along the supply chain remains a challenge. This could help identify where more needs to be done to facilitate and promote the practical utility of these mechanisms. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, the United Kingdom. I give the floor to Liberia.
Thank you, Chair. Let me take the time to thank Nigeria as the lead for the important intersectional working group. Chair, with regard to decision 19.88 paragraph B, Liberia understands that some stakeholders in this room affirm that the key challenge encountered by CITES parties seeking more funding is not so much a lack of valuable funding, but challenges with accessing these funds. Chair, Liberia would like to understand how statements such as these can possibly be made without undertaking consultations with parties with all their enormous funding gaps. While we accept that there may be challenges with accessing existing funds, we would extremely be surprised if existing available funds were truly sufficient to address the wildlife crime crisis in West Africa. Chair, the reason these decisions were adopted was a result of a UNODC threat assessment to West Africa, which found widespread problems. It is in its presentation of the document in COP 18.34, the Secretariat noted that support from parties, donors, government, intergovernmental organizations, and others is essential, including ensuring that the mobilization of resources and technical support are targeted towards addressing the matters identified by the threat assessment and associated recommendations. Chair, since that UNODC assessment was published.
Liberia, you have reached your 2-minute limit. Can you please sum up and focus on the recommendations of whether or not you support them?
Okay. I would like to strongly urge that the discussion of the working group be based on facts. We need more funds to CITES enforcement and CITES implementation. If the funds are available, we need a matching platform
Liberia,
to ensure funds.
I'm going to ask you to conclude your intervention. I really would like folks to respect the 2-minute time limit. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to complete the agenda on this meeting.
Okay, Chair.
Please edit your interventions for 2 minutes. Please put your recommendations, whether you support them or not, up front in your intervention so that we can move the agenda along.
Okay, we support Nigeria for additional funding.
Thank you. I give the floor to observer parties. Senegal, you have the floor.
Voilà, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Madam. We agree with Liberia. We fully support this initiative. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Senegal. I give the floor to Benin.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam. Benin would like to thank Nigeria and also supports the idea of fundraising to support these African states. Thank you.
Thank you, Benin. I give the floor to Guinea, and I'm going to close the list for speakers.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam. Guinea also supports the decision presented by Nigeria and would like to congratulate Nigeria on this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Guinea. And I'm going to talk to the Standing Committee right now. I see a lot of support for the recommendations in the document. We had one edit provided by the representative from Belgium for recommendation C, where it would read, request that the working group to consider and, if needed, finalize the questionnaire directed to parties, intergovernmental organizations, and non-governmental organizations regarding existing access to finance mechanisms for CITES enforcement. Is there support for that recommendation, that edit? Okay, so the Standing Committee agrees to the recommendations in paragraph 14 of document 39.4 with the edit made by the representative from Belgium. With that, I conclude this agenda item and we move forward to the top of Wednesday's agenda, item number 47, introduction from the sea. And I give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the document.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This document 47 on introduction from the sea, a matter which is becoming increasingly important with the inclusion of additional marine species in Appendix 2. The Secretariat reports in the present document on the activities conducted with regards to the implementation of decisions 19140, including the adoption of the agreement on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. And with respect to paragraph B and D, the CITES Secretariat issued a notification to the parties, number 079 in July this year, inviting parties to provide information on their implementation of Resolution Conf 14.6 on introduction from the sea. Information was provided by Australia, Indonesia, Japan, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America, as well as the organization Wildlife Conservation Society. Thank you very much for this feedback. On paragraphs 15 to 17, we provide information on the progress made regarding the approach and work with the states that are most active in the trade in CITES marine species, particularly from ABNG areas. And I would like to recognize and thank our partner FAO for the excellent cooperation in assisting the countries and conducting training activities in different regions. Finally, paragraph 18 to 22 provides feedback received on 10 most frequently asked questions on introduction from the sea and the responses proposed by the CITES Secretariat. Many thanks to all the parties and stakeholders that provided inputs, and the Secretariat welcomes further feedback. We understand that there are new comments coming, including very detailed editorial suggestions. So we invite the Standing Committee to consider the recommendations contained in paragraph 26 with a small modification to paragraph D that will start now with a sentence that says, extend the deadline until the 31st December 2023 for providing inputs, and request the Secretariat to make the living document, this is a living document, available on the CITES webpage, and it follows as drafted in the recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. And now I open the floor to comments from the Standing Committee. I give the floor to the United States. Oh, sorry, Japan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, we are grateful to the Secretariat for preparing the very informative document on this matter. Since our comments submitted before were reflected properly, Japan has no particular comment on the revised FAQ requested to be reviewed in the recommendation C in the paragraph 26. And Japan also supports the other four recommendations, including slight modifications in the same paragraph on this agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Secretariat for preparing this document. The UK supports the recommendations in paragraph 26 and welcomes the revised 10 questions in the annex to the document. The UK encourages improved compliance with the requirements related to introduction from the sea and better, clearer guidance to facilitate this. However, we recognise that this is an area of complexity, one frequently misunderstood and misinterpreted, and concerted efforts and meaningful collaborations are required by CITES parties, fisheries bodies and other stakeholders for better implementation. To this end, we draw attention to the proposed technical workshop on making NDFs for species taken in areas beyond natural jurisdiction, provisionally scheduled for the end of February 2024. That almost all commercially exploited pelagic elasma ranks will be CITES listed by the end of this month, presents an opportunity, not a barrier, to progressing towards effective implementation of IFS, improving compliance and reporting and tackling illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. Thank you.
Thank you, the United Kingdom. I give the floor to New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Oceania welcomes this paper from the Secretariat because the Oceania region is unsurprisingly dominated by the sea and has significant areas of the Pacific Ocean that lie beyond national jurisdictions of countries and territories in the region. The first CITES FAO legal workshop on CITES and fisheries was held in our region in November 2019 and was very much appreciated. We thank the 6 parties and an NGO that responded to the notification, and the amendments to the questions and answers to the now 12 frequently asked questions seem sensible to us, except that the new question X is adequately covered by the answer to the new question Y, and the final part of the answer to that question Y about scientific samples is better incorporated into answers to questions 9 and 10. So we may end up with 11 frequently asked questions. We note that the technical workshop on NDFs for IFS specimens is planned for early 2024. We hope that one of the outcomes of that meeting, and also perhaps arising from the NDF workshop in Nairobi in December, will be a number of suggestions to amend Resolution 14.6 that can be considered at Animals Committee 33 and then Standing Committee 78. We also note that the Standing Committee's Intersessional Working Group on Sharks may also suggest further amendments to the resolution for consideration at Standing Committee 78 on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The North American region would like to express its appreciation to the Secretariat for revising and consolidating responses from parties and observers on the 10 questions most frequently asked on CITES trade from areas beyond national jurisdiction. We would like to provide the Secretariat some additional clarifying input to the annex found in Standing Committee 77, Doc 47. Our input for consideration by the Secretariat can be found in INF Doc 35. The North American region supports requesting the Secretariat to make the final document available on the CITES webpage and to use it as part of its capacity building material as recommended in Doc 47. We believe the clarification provided in the document could help with consistent implementation of introduction from the sea requirements by parties. The North American region supports requesting the Secretariat to prepare a further report for SC 78 for onward submission to COP 20. The North American region also supports the Standing Committee taking note of the responses from the parties provided on implementation of Resolution 14.6 Rev COP 16, summarized in paragraphs 10 to 4 of Doc 47. We understand Decision 19.141 tasks the Standing Committee to provide COP 20 with recommendations regarding the possible amendment of the annex of the resolution. However, we believe it is premature to agree with the suggestion that the Standing Committee review Res Comp 14.6 Rev Cop 16 as raised by the Secretariat in paragraph 24 of Standing Committee 77, Doc 47. It took years to reach agreement on this resolution and the negotiations were contentious. The North American region suggests that the Secretariat take into account another round of feedback from the parties once the FAQs are agreed to and published, as well as to issue a notification asking the parties to identify specific amendments to facilitate implementation of the annex based on the FAQs so the Secretariat can present recommendations to SC 78 to fulfill Decision 19.141. Moreover, these consultations could be useful for the pending workshop on introduction from the sea prior to COP 20. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, North American region. I open the floor to observer parties. The European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you. The European Union and its member states thank the Secretariat for the report and the efforts made to improve the implementation of provisions linked to CITES trade from the high seas. We agree with the Secretariat's assessment that for successful implementation of CITES provisions for marine species, effective cooperation between CITES, the BBNJ agreement, and fisheries authorities is essential. We encourage the Secretariat to continue consideration of the interaction between CITES and the BBNJ agreement. We support the opportunity to provide further input in the review of the list of FAQs and hope for a wide range of input from various parties and stakeholders. In principle, we agree with modifications that have been included up to now in the annex to documents Standing Committee 77, Doc 47. However, we will have some further revisions to propose, which we will communicate by the deadline announced by the Secretariat. Without prejudice to those further contributions on our side, we would like to offer the following initial comments to the revised FAQs proposed by the Secretariat. As regards the question 1, there is a need to find a practical guidance for the issue of IFS permits while avoiding being too prescriptive. The amended question 1 is clearer, and in principle the EU and member states can agree to the formulations made. However, the answer should clearly set out what will happen if no CITES is issued for already caught animals. The current wording is not clear. EU and member states suggest that the final sentence be amended as follows. In this event, the management authority would not be able to issue a certificate and the specimen is likely to be confiscated, or the specimen should be confiscated. On question 3, based on the EU and Member States' understanding, there is no agreement in place that fulfills the criteria listed in Article 4, paragraphs 4 and 5 of the Convention at this stage. It does not seem helpful to make reference to provisions for which there is no experience in their application up to date. The EU and Member States therefore prefer deleting paragraph 3.2.
The European Union, you've reached your 2-minute intervention limit. Can you please give it a couple?
I think we can send the further comments by the deadline proposed by the Secretariat. It would be better. Thank you very much.
That's the best way forward. Thank you. Open the floor now to observer organizations. I give the floor to IFA, International Fund for Animal Welfare.
Thank you, Chair. I'm making this intervention on behalf of 11 observer organisations, including members of the High Seas Alliance. A full list will be provided to the Secretariat to be included in the record. We urge the Standing Committee to adopt the recommendations in Document 47. The amendments proposed to the introduction from the sea frequently asked questions offer important clarifications and enhance the helpfulness of the document. We agree with the Secretariat's observation in paragraph 23 that additional issues may need to be reflected in the FAQs in future, following completion of the work on NDFs for marine species taken in areas beyond national jurisdiction and following entry into force of the BBNJ agreement. The document identifies Article 5, paragraph 2 of the BBNJ agreement as of particular relevance. This article refers to the application of the agreement in a manner that does not undermine other relevant instruments and that promotes coherence with them. At the same time, it is important to read that article in conjunction with Article 8, paragraph 2 of the BBNJ agreement that also requires its parties to promote the objectives of the BBNJ agreement when participating in other bodies. If implemented effectively by CITES parties, the introduction from the sea provisions can play an important role in promoting the objectives of the BBNJ agreement to conserve biodiversity on the high seas. The BBNJ agreement is an historic achievement, and we join the UN Secretary-General in urging countries to spare no effort to ensure that the agreement enters into force by ratifying the agreement without delay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I would really urge everyone, please, to respect the time limits I'm putting on the interventions. Otherwise, I will have to seek alternate options, which I really do not want to. I give the floor to WCS, and I'm closing the list for interventions on this topic.
Thank you, Chair. WCS appreciates the attention of the parties to the implementation of their obligation relevant to specimens taken in areas beyond national jurisdiction. We appreciate all the hard work, consensus building, and negotiations that went into adoption of Resolution 14.6 Rev. Unfortunately, more progress is needed on its implementation. We appreciate the document, support the recommendations, and thank the Secretariat for the proposed changes, including consideration of suggestions that we made. And we support its posting to the website and use in capacity building. In this context as well, we note the recently agreed BBNJ agreement, agreed with the previous speaker, urge parties to ratify it as soon as possible, noting that effective implementation of introduction from the sea under CITES reinforces and helps implement the objectives of the BBNJ agreement to conserve biodiversity on the high seas. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, WCS. And I'm going to talk now to the Standing Committee members. Looking at the recommendations in paragraph 26, I have heard agreement for recommendation A. I've heard agreement for recommendation B. Recommendation C, there was an addition by the Secretariat that would read, review the revised 10 questions most frequently asked on CITES trade from areas beyond national jurisdiction, and the responses prepared by the Secretariat contain an annex to the present document and provide further inputs as appropriate. And in the Standing Committee extends the deadline to provide input on comments until December 31st, 2023. Support for that. The Secretariat made a change in recommendation D, changing it to a living document, as this is something that will be constantly revised as more input, and this is the resolution is implemented. So support for to agree to recommendation D as revised by the Secretariat. Then we had a new recommendation from the North American region that requests the Secretariat to issue a notification to the parties to seek information on the specific challenges in implementation of Resolution 14.6 and its annex. Is that a correct, did I capture it correctly? And I'm looking to see if there's support from the Standing Committee on that recommendation, the additional one. I'm seeing some head nods, so the Standing Committee agrees to that additional recommendation F, provided by the North American region, and agrees to recommendation E for the Secretary to prepare a further report to SC 78 on onward submissions to the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Okay, with that, I close this agenda item and we move to the next one, which is Sharks and Rays. Document 67.1, non-compliant trade in white tip. So for this one, since there are 3 documents under Sharks and Rays, I'm going to have them introduced all at the same time, and then we will go through the documents, go through the recommendations document by document. So they'll be introduced by the Maldives, the Animals Committee, and then the Secretariat, and then we'll take the Maldives document first, look at the recommendations in that document, and then the ones from the Animals Committee, and then the ones from the Secretariat. And so I give the floor to the Maldives to introduce their document. Is that okay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Given that this is the first time Maldives takes the floor, we would like to welcome and congratulate you, Madam Chair, and wish Dr. Rosemary a quick recovery. We thank the Secretariat and the host country, Switzerland, for the excellent arrangements. We refer to document SC 77, Doc 67.1, submitted to the committee in response to Conf Res 12.6, Rev Corp 18, Conf Res 12.8, Rev Corp 18, and the elements of decisions 19.222 to 19.227 on Sharks and Rays with full consideration of the CITES COP19 document 65. Our document demonstrates a global analysis of the implementation of the inclusion of Appendix 2 of Carcharinus longimanus Oceanic Whitetip shark adopted at COP16 2013, entered into force in 2014. Our proposal addresses the possible extent of illegal, unregulated, and unreported IUU fishing and trade in this species that may not be in full compliance with the CITES, and the serious issue of non-compliance with the core CITES obligation and intersects with the decisions of implementations of the state resolutions. Oceanic whitetip sharks are highly vulnerable species taken as bycatch in global pelagic fisheries. Along with its CITES Appendix 2 listing, concerns over the species' continued declining populations, now listed as critically endangered globally by IUCN, have resulted in stronger protection for the oceanic whitetip through a range of fishery management, biodiversity conservation, and trade regulation measures at regional and global scales. The combination of these measures make it highly unlikely that parties will be able to issue legal acquisition and non-detrimental findings at any significant scale, and we would expect to see very low level of reported trade and presence in shark fin markets in East Asia. However, we find this study illustrated that there are clear discrepancies between volumes of oceanic whitetip recorded in the CITES trade database and found those in global fin trade. It appears from this analysis that large volumes of oceanic whitetip products are being traded without adequate CITES documentation and are non-compliant with CITES. These compliance issues cut across trade and fisheries bodies with respect to regulating the international trade of high-value fin exports in oceanic whitetip. In addition to documented trade, there appears to be ongoing illegal and undocumented international trade in the species at substantial volumes of serious risk to critically endangered species, and inadequate legal acquisition findings may also be taking place. As such, the Maldives believes further action is required. We brought a version of this analysis to the 32nd Animals Committee and thank the committee's decision to select the Oceanic Whitetip for review of significant trade process during the intersessional period, with the inclusion of multiple countries in the process to clarify sustainability of reported trade. We strongly believe further action is needed here at SC 77, as the analysis notes both significant reported and unreported trade in the Oceanic Whitetip shark, with the latter likely representing significant trade in the species that is not being reported to the CITES. As such, we take note of the recommendations put forward to the SC to request the Secretariat to prioritize Oceanic Whitetip in its analysis being conducted under Decisions 19.223 paragraph C regarding the mismatch between catch and trade data in order to address the volumes of Oceanic Whitetip catch and or traded report in Regional Fisheries Management Organization and FAO database that is not documented in CITES trade database. We welcome the inclusion of language to this effect in document 67.3, paragraph 11 prepared by Secretariat. We take this opportunity to acknowledge and note a concern raised by Australia in their inclusion of in the analysis is an error resulting from incorrect landings data reported to the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission, which has been amended since the report has been completed. With the provision of that information, we propose that Australia could be removed from the process outlined in paragraph 2 of the recommendations in the document 67.1. Additionally, to address the issue of confiscations to the point of import and market surveys that indicate there is an apparent ongoing trade in the Oceanic Whitetip by CITES parties that continue not to be reported anywhere, we recommend that the Standing Committee request parties that those not have documented those have a documented historic role in the trade of Oceanic Whitetip, as noted in Table 8 of the appendix to this document, to report to the CITES Secretariat on their national implementation efforts and regulations for implementation of the listing of OWT. We request the Secretariat to compile these responses of parties and present them to the 78th session of the Standing Committee, and based on the responses of the parties and report to the Secretariat to identify possible cases of non-compliance. Furthermore, given that the species is primarily caught in high seas fisheries, we also recommend the Standing Committee to request the Secretariat to prioritize Oceanic Whitetip under Decisions 19.225, which requests the Secretariat to continue to monitor IFS implementation to address the issue that there appears to be poor compliance with CITES obligations for IFS and species taken in areas beyond national jurisdiction, since no IFS catch of OWT has been reported. Lastly, we recommend the Standing Committee strongly encourage parties who have confiscations or seizures of specimens of OWT or are encountering difficulties implementing the listing of this critically endangered species to submit that information in their reports to the Standing Committee and the Secretariat in order to ensure that the enforcement of the species Appendix 2 listing is prioritized across all parties. The Maldives welcomes support and remains fully committed to engage and discuss the analysis presented. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, the Maldives. I give the floor to the Chair of the Animals Committee. I give the floor to the Chair. Oh, to Switzerland, who's the Chair of the Animals Committee.
Thank you, Chair. At COP19, decisions 19.222 and 19.227 on sharks and rays were adopted. This document reports on the implementation of Decision 19.225 directed to the Animals Committee and Decision 19.226 directed to the Standing Committee. At AC32, the Animals Committee established an in-session working group on sharks and rays, and later agreed to invite the Standing Committee to consider a range of recommendations which are contained in paragraph 5 of this document. In relation to these recommendations, I would like to note that recommendations B and C in paragraph 5 on WCO's HS code seem to be already addressed in Resolution Conf 12.6 on conservation and management of sharks in paragraphs 9 and 8 respectively. This paragraph 9 reads, instructs the Secretariat to monitor discussions within the World Customs Organization regarding the development of a customs data model and the inclusion therein of data fields to report trade in sharks at species level, and to issue notifications to the parties concerning any significant developments. And paragraph 8 reads, requests management authorities to collaborate with their national customs authorities to expand their current classification system to allow for the collection and reporting of detailed data on shark trade. Furthermore, in relation to recommendation E, which is on the consideration of the development of a new digital reporting and traceability system, the Standing Committee may wish to consider it under the mandate of the Electronic Systems and Information Technologies Working Group, in the context of its mandate in paragraph 3, which reads, monitor and advise on parties' work related to the development of traceability systems for specimens of CITES-listed species to facilitate their harmonization with CITES permits and certificates. And lastly, recommendation F is now, as it is read, directed to the Standing Committee, and the intent was to direct it to the parties. So it may be amended to read, remind parties to consider the appropriate use of pre-convention and so on. Regarding the implementation of Decision 19226, as directed by the Conference of the Parties in paragraph D of Decision 19226, the Standing Committee shall, in consultation with the Animals Committee, discuss challenges related to the transport of biological samples for research and data collection purposes in the context of fisheries management. So the Animals Committee, to support the implementation of paragraph D, agreed to nominate the representative of Central and South America and Caribbean, Mr. Congora, and the representative of Oceania, Mr. Robertson, to participate in the Standing Committee in the Sessional Working Group on Sharks and Rays. So the final recommendations of this document is the Standing Committee is invited to consider the recommendations and the comments just made in paragraph 5 of this document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair of the Animals Committee. I give the floor now to the Secretariat to introduce their document.
Thank you, Chair. Document SC77, Doc 67.3, was prepared by the Secretariat and provides updates on the implementation of the decisions on sharks and rays as adopted at the 19th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The Secretariat issued a notification to the parties in March 2023 and thanks the parties and organizations that provided valuable information. The Animals Committee, at its 32nd meeting, examined the scientific information contained within these responses to make recommendations and requested the Secretariat to issue a second notification to the parties to capture new information. This notification is planned to be published in early 2024. For the implementation of the study on the apparent mismatch between expected and reported trade data, the Secretariat is collaborating with Traffic to conduct a study thanks to the generous donation by the European Union. The results of the study will be presented to AC33 and to the SC78. The study will consider all shark and ray species that were listed up to COP17, which includes the Oceanic Whitetip shark, and 2 mako shark species, which were listed in COP18. In addition, the study will consider the information presented within SC77, Doc 67.1, which was submitted to AC32. The Secretariat is also collaborating with FAO on capacity building activities and updating the shark measures database. At the request of the Animals Committee, the Secretariat is looking into the feasibility of including catch locations in the annual reports for sharks and rays and noted the different ways that sharks and rays from areas beyond national jurisdiction are currently being reported. The Secretariat will review and provide further guidance on this while considering the feasibility of including catch locations in annual reports and report back to the AC and SC as appropriate.
In conclusion, the Standing Committee is invited to consider recommendations included in paragraph 20 of this document. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. And I give the floor to the United States as the chair of the Sharks and Waves Working Group.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regrettably, we had a late commencement of the vital work in addressing our working group's important mandate to help provide additional guidance on implementation regarding CITES listed sharks and rays. In a short period of time, the working group has made progress in addressing Item A of the mandate, which asks the working group to review and revise the rapid guide on making of legal acquisition findings and related assessments as they relate to trade in CITES-listed shark species caught in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and determine if more specific guidance is needed for CITES-listed shark species, including engagement with RFMOs and any capacity building which might support their role in making of legal acquisition findings. I wanted to extend my gratitude to the working group members for their hard work and thought-provoking discussions, and I look forward to continuing to make strides towards fulfilling our mandate. I anticipate the working group will have a very thorough report to present to the Standing Committee at SC 78. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge the Secretariat's request to the Standing Committee, the Standing Committee in SC 77 Doc 67.3 to request the working group on sharks and rays to consider the non-scientific aspects of the responses to notification of the parties number 2023-27. I don't foresee any issues with the addition to our current mandate if adopted by the Standing Committee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, the United States. And so I'm going to open the floor now to members of the Standing Committee and give the floor to New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Oceania would like to thank the Maldives for presenting their detailed analysis in 67.1 and also for correcting the error regarding Australia's purported trade of oceanic whitetip shark since 2013. Oceania supports recommendation 1 to prioritise oceanic whitetip shark in its analysis of the apparent mismatch in the reporting of catches, especially given that all relevant tuna RFMOs have retention bans in place, yet significant volumes of this pelagic shark are still being traded in fish markets. This suggests that the species may be subject to serious levels of IUU, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, despite the best efforts of the tuna RFMOs, FAOs, CITES parties and others to protect this critically endangered shark species. Regarding recommendation 2, Oceania is concerned that Table 8 of the Annex is too coarse to be useful. It includes parties simply because they were among the top 20 parties reporting their shark catches at some particular point in time. The high volumes may not include any oceanic whitetip sharks. For example, New Zealand is on the list, and yet oceanic whitetip is fully protected in New Zealand waters since before CITES listing and is subject to negative NDF since it was listed. We would prefer that rather than focus on the parties noted in Table 8, that all parties that catch pelagic sharks, regardless of their history of catching this particular species, be invited to report to the Secretariat on their national level implementation efforts and regulations for implementing oceanic whitetip shark protection. This will help importing countries understand if imports of oceanic whitetips have been legally acquired. We also note that the review of significant trade process undertaken at Animals Committee 32, where 4 species country combinations for the species were chosen for closer analysis, is a useful path for CITES to follow. Oceania supports recommendation 3 for the Secretariat to prioritise the monitoring of introduction from the sea implementation along the lines seen in Doc 67.3. Regarding recommendation 4, we note that there is an existing obligation on parties to submit CITES annual illegal trade report, which would capture the information on confiscations and seizures of oceanic whitetips. Given that this provision already exists, and because implementation issues could be scientific in nature, we suggest that 4A is amended to read, In addition to existing obligations to report confiscations and seizures of oceanic whitetips in the CITES annual trade report, parties which are encountering difficulties implementing the listing of the species are strongly encouraged to submit that information to the Secretariat to pass on to the Animals Committee and/or the Standing Committee as appropriate. Would you like to read that one more time, or you?
I have two things.
You'll get the gist of it.
Yeah, two things. One would be for recommendation 2A, little I. You suggest that this is for all parties and not just parties that are indicated in as been affected or historically have traded in these species and listed in Annex 8. Is this you would like all parties to report?
All parties that catch pelagic sharks. So Switzerland wouldn't need to report.
Okay. And then please just read the edit for 4. In addition to existing recommendations to report.
In addition to existing obligations to report confiscations and seizures of oceanic white-tip shark in the CITES annual trade report, parties which are encountering difficulties implementing the listing of this species are strongly encouraged to submit that information to the Secretariat to pass on to the Animals Committee and/or the Standing Committee as appropriate.
Thank you, New Zealand.
Thank you.
I'm going to give the floor to Brazil.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I shall be brief. We'd like to thank the Maldives for having introduced 67.1. As a national representative, we would stress that what is mentioned in the document, that we do not have problems with OWT, but because we prefer to consider all shark species rather than being able to deal specifically with the oceanic whitetip. So we think that it's very hard to have one database for countries with such very, very tough situations with respect to Carcharinus longimanus. Our situations are all very different. With respect to sustainable development and sustainable use of biodiversity, we are not opposed to the adoption of the recommendations in A, 3A, and 4A of the document. We would stress that we have always been in favor of developing policies to protect ocean sharks. We agree with those who have said that this should be an Appendix 2 listed species, as was agreed by COP3. The government of Brazil also suggested that this species be included in the Memorandum of Understanding on sharks on the CMS, under the CMS. The government of Brazil also suggested that we also have carefully and dutifully adopted 10.7 ICAT convention, which prohibits the trade in any parts and derivatives of this species. We support the 2014 decree of our ministry, which prohibits any fishing of any fish that are threatened with extinction. We also have the second round of our national plan for the protection of marine sharks and rays that are threatened with extinction. And we have involved different government sectors as well as the fisheries sector in these initiatives. We would also say that the government of Brazil has deals with the fisheries issues at ministerial level because they were a very significant part of our sustainable development plan. We are now looking at reviewing our national fishery statistics, and we are going to be updating our onboard observation systems. We've been looking at tuna fishing, because that fishing has an effect on the shark situation, and we are also going to be able to look at the situation with respect to species threatened with extinction, including sea sharks. We also are looking at what we can do in order to protect sharks, and particularly from finning. And we are trying to look at biogenetic identification means. We, in other words, have a long and successful record when it comes to protecting Carcharodontis longimanus, and we are perfectly prepared to share our experience with other parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I have six folks in the committee who wish to speak, and so I will ask you folks also to be brief. I really do not want to limit the Standing Committee's ability to provide interventions, but if necessary, I will put a timer on you, the committee members, if we're not able to move forward. But right now, I'm not going to do that, but just putting it out there. I give the floor to Poland.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I promise to be brief. So on Doc 67.1, we would like to thank Maldives for raising the issue and submitting this important report. We acknowledge and support all the findings, and we align ourselves with the recommendations presented, together with changes proposed by a representative of Oceania. We also wish to emphasize that the issue described for the Oceanic Whitetip shark is a part of a bigger problem, including all CITES listed shark species, which is something that needs to be adequately addressed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Poland. I give the floor to the representative from Japan.
Thank you, Chair. Under the CITES framework, Japan made some reservations on listed shark species, but shark resources are very important for us as well as for Japanese fishery. So we will continuously contribute to the sustainable use of this species precious stocks based on the decisions of the relevant regional fisheries management bodies. As a part of this policy, we have already prohibited the retention of Oceanic Whitetip shark based on the decision made by the Tunnel Arrowhead from 2011 to 2013 by the domestic laws and regulations. Japan welcomes the contribution made by CITES to the conservation and sustainable use of CITES-listed species. So Japan would like to generally support recommendations of this agenda item 67.1 to 0.3 within the mandate of this convention, including suggestions made by New Zealand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan. I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. The UK is fully supportive of the effective implementation of CITES for shark species. We support the recommendation that the Secretariat prioritise ocean whitetip in the analysis of the mismatch between catch and trade data and in relation to monitoring introduction from the sea implementation. We recognise other Appendix 2 listed pelagic sharks, such as shortfin mako and silky shark, are reported in CITES trade in much larger quantities than the ocean whitetip. It seems inconceivable that these species and others are not contributing significantly to the missing sharks. However, we consider the prioritisation of ocean whitetip can help facilitate pathways to effective implementation for all CITES-listed sharks. We therefore welcome the paper submitted by the Maldives and align with the recommendations outlined in the document. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Chair. The North American region would like to thank the Maldives for submitting this document, which provides evidence of significant volumes of oceanic whitetip shark trade in international trade. We're deeply concerned about the level of trade in this species, and we remind CITES parties that due to significant declines in this once abundant species and its conservation status, all 4 of the tuna regional fishery management organizations have adopted conservation management measures that prohibit retention, transshipment, storage, and landing of oceanic whitetip sharks. Based on the protections in place for this species under CITES and at the RFMOs, as a region, we are concerned by the findings in this document. Therefore, we support the recommendations put forward by the Maldives. We urge our colleagues to join us in supporting these recommendations to help ensure CITES parties are in compliance with international trade controls for oceanic whitetip sharks. And we also urge CITES parties to prioritize combating IUU fishing both domestically and on the high seas in support of effective CITES implementation for species such as the Oceanic Whitetip shark. Thank you.
Thank you, the United States. I give the floor to Kuwait.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to thank the Maldives on their report, and we would like to support the recommendation in this document. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuwait. I give the floor to Indonesia.
Please record this intervention for document ST77, Doc 67.2. Indonesia congratulates the Animal Committee for preparation of the document, and we support the recommendations for the agenda 67.2, in which Indonesia also has undertaken several actions related to the implementation of recording and reporting trade in products using unit measurements in accordance with the HS codes. The Indonesian Management Authority for Fish also has been collaborating with the Ministry of Trade and Customs Agency to integrate the system for export documents, including for CITES export permits, approval of export by Minister of Trade, and export declaration by Customs Agency. By implementing the system, we expect that each ministry or agency has consistent and reliable data at the national level on the export of shark and ray products by implementing the standard terms and measurements units. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Indonesia. I give the floor to Kenya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just like other colleagues, we want to thank Maldives for submitting this document to the Standing Committee. Madam Chair, this document highlights a serious issue of non-compliance with core CITES part obligations and intersects with the discussions of implementation of Resolution 12.6 and Decision 19.222227. Madam Chair, we want to align ourselves and support the recommendations that are contained in this document. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Kenya. I give the floor to Panama.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Panama would like to thank the Maldives for their document and the Secretariat for the report. We'd like to take this opportunity to update the committee on what has recently been done to have, with respect to the CITES listing of sharks. Our Minister for the Environment has recently organized a workshop which involved a number of representatives from the university sector, fisheries sector, as well as national environmental organizations. And we ended up with a decision on hammerhead sharks and for blue sharks. And we will provide the Secretariat with the final results of this workshop. We would also like to thank all of the NGOs and the FAO and all of the other national bodies that provide us with assistance and support for this workshop. And we would urge other parties to make use of this tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Panama. I will open the floor now to take comments from a few observer parties. I give the floor to Argentina.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Madam. We would like, first of all, to thank the Maldives for presenting this very significant report. And we would like to further say that we agree with the recommendations therein. With respect to INFA 3, the information on Argentina is not correct. We are not countries that actually land white-tip sharks. So we would like to clarify that matter. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Senegal, and I'm going to close the list for observer parties.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam. We share the concerns expressed by the Maltese with respect to the fishing and landing of the sharks threatened with extinction. And we would agree with the document agreed at the last meeting of the Animals Committee. At that meeting, Senegal was selected for a study, and because of the vulnerability of the species, we held national consultations with all those involved, and we set a 0 export quota for the species in order to determine its exact situation. So we, on October 30th of this year, sent a formal notification of this decision to the Secretariat. I would be grateful for Secretariat support and to have such support extended to all countries that require technical and financial support for actually making NDFs. Thank you.
Thank you, Senegal. I give the floor to Australia.
Thank you, Chair. Australia thanks the Maldives for their work developing the report in Doc 67.1 and acknowledging the data issues in the paper as they relate to Australia. Australia recognises the importance of addressing potential illegal trade in Oceanic Whitetip, and we broadly support the recommendations included in this paper. However, as highlighted by Oceania, while reviewing the analysis in Annex 1 of the report, we have also identified discrepancies in the TRFMOs and AFO catch data. Australia would like to take this opportunity to state it is in full compliance with the WCPFC non-retention measures and has domestic legislation that Oceanic Whitetip is not retained. Australia also issued negative NDFs for Oceanic Whitetip in 2014 and 2017. Those NDFs found that any harvest of the species would be detrimental to its survival. Australia has no records of the species being exported since it was listed. Further, on page 17 of Traffic's 2022 report, Missing Sharks, Australia's management of Oceanic Whitetip is addressed. The report highlights that while Australia has historically caught the species, no trade has been reported to either FAO or CITES, and that there is evidence of both a negative NDF and changes to both national and regional management measures which account for there being no records of trade in the species. In addition, Australia notes and welcomes a study to be conducted by Traffic on behalf of the Secretariat under Decision 19.223. This work will further build upon Traffic's Missing Sharks report and will greatly assist discrepancies in catch and trade data. Traffic has also confirmed they will consider the misrepresentation of Australian data in this report. We encourage other parties to work with the Secretariat and Traffic to determine where Oceanic Whitetip is occurring. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. I will give the floor to Oman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding SC 77 Doc 67.1, Oman recognized the rapid population decline of the critically endangered Oceanic Whitetip shark worldwide. In this regard, Oman has decided to suspend the trade in Carcharanus lungmanus and the Spherina for 6 months in order to allow us collecting data and gathering information to carry out the NDF studies for the two species. Oman CITES National Focal Point has already informed CITES Secretariat about this action, which will be effective in the beginning of December 2023. Oman has also submitted 2 NDFs for thresher sharks and silky sharks. These 2 species were selected during the national workshop, which took place last year in Muscat. This workshop was organized by the Oman's Environment Authority in cooperation with the IFO, the International Fund for Animal Welfare. And we seize this opportunity to thank IFO for their assistance and support in building our capacity to perform the NDF studies for the shark species. However, due to a big challenge in carrying out the NDFs for sharks, therefore we request support and more capacity building workshops to enable us perform the NDFs. Also, we need smart identification techniques and reporting methodology for the shark species. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Oman, and I give the floor to Mozambique.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mozambique supports the document from Maldives and all the recommendations which are there. It's important to note that the protection of sharks and rays in Mozambique still represents a challenge and requires improvement in specific regulatory measures. We do have a regulation on marine fishing, which contains management measures for protection of sharks and rays, including the Charadinus longmanus, which is part of 15 species. Our monitoring data indicates that the catch of sharks has decreased, but the observations did not go further as the species level. And our concern is the limitation of shark identification and enforcement, which may possibly contribute to the CITES species trade in those places. Despite that, the efforts of training in species identification, we consider that to continue have support on extending this training to the provincial level, considering that the country has about 2,700 kilometers of the coast. On the document 67.2, Mozambique believes that trade data indicate under reporting by CITES and that the delivery of a full start phase described in decision 18221 and rolled over into decision 19223 of mismatch between cash and trade level in CITES listed sharks and rays should remain a top priority.
I'm sorry. We're just taking recommendations on the document 67.1 right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to give the floor to Gabon, and then I'm going to take one observer organization. You have the floor, Gabon.
Merci, Madame. Thank you, Madam. Gabon would like to thank the Maldives for having drafted and presented this document. It shows that there is a serious problem with respect to the disregard to basic measures resulting from the species having been CITES listed. So we would agree with all the recommendations that the Maldives makes with respect to Carcharinus longimanus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabon. And I give the floor to Opus Oceania Foundation.
Hi, thank you, Humane Society International. My mic is on.
No. Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam. This is the first time Opus Oceanico has taken the floor at SC 77. We would like to take this opportunity to thank the chair for her work in guiding our debates, and we would like to thank the Secretariat for their preparatory work. With respect to 67.1, the document really says it all. We see that there is trade underway that does not meet the requirements that we have for appendix, for CITES listed sharks such as Carcharinus longimanus. According to this document and the Secretariat's document, the discrepancy with respect to landing of OWT shows that we really do need to improve our data. So we do think that this illegal fishing seems to be the rule rather than exception. So we do think that we need to ensure that those appendix listed sharks are protected, and we need to ensure that everything is done in order to ensure that we deal with fisheries through regulation and inspection, among others. We would like to thank the Maldives for having recognized the significant problems relating to OWT, and we do think that all of this has to be covered in an RST for this species. All of this is good in the interest of governance. We do think that it's important to come up with helpful measures that will help parties meet their obligations, and that we will all ensure that we can protect all of the appendix listed oceanic species. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so I'm just going to focus now on the Standing Committee. I'm hearing an overwhelming support from the recommendations that was submitted by the Maldives, which is excellent, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. And the only thing I've heard in terms of additional consideration is the edit made by the gentleman from Oceania. And so going through the recommendations one by one, I feel like there's agreement for recommendation 1A. The committee agrees to adopt recommendation the committee agrees to recommendation 1A. In terms of recommendation 2A little I, we have the insertion of request parties that catch pelagic sharks to report to the Secretariat on the national level implementation efforts and regulations for implementing the listings of the Oceanic white reef shark, white-tipped shark. Is there support for that edit by the gentleman from New Zealand? Yes. Okay, the committee agrees to recommendation AI as amended as just read by myself. We have recommendation 2A little I, there was agreement on that. So the Standing Committee agrees to that recommendation. The Standing Committee agrees to recommendation 2A little I. The Standing Committee agrees to recommendation 3A. And in regards to the last recommendation, 4A, we have the edit made again by the gentleman from New Zealand for to add, in addition to the existing obligations to report confiscation and seizures of oceanic white-tipped sharks in CITES annual illegal trade reports, parties which are encountering difficulties implementing the listings of the species, to submit that information to the Secretariat to pass on to the Animals Committee and the Standing Committee as appropriate. Is there support for that addition and remix by the chair? Okay, so the committee agrees to recommendation 4A as I have just read out on the floor. With that, I close this agenda item and we will move to the next document, which is the report.
62.
Yeah, 63.2, the 67.2, the report of the Animals Committee. So if we can focus on the recommendations as outlined in that document, I will open the floor to members of the Standing Committee to make their comments. I will ask the chair of the Animals Committee, which will be Switzerland, if you can just reintroduce the edits that you made when you introduced your document.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's not actually edits. It's just some are edits, some are just remarks in relation to recommendations B and C on the WCAO's HS codes. It seems that they are being addressed in the resolution, Conf 12.6 on the conservation and management of sharks. And maybe it would be good to remind parties about these recommendations in the resolution. In relation to recommendation E, consider the development of a new digital reporting and traceability mechanisms. This topic may be dealt with within the mandate of the Electronic Systems and Information Technologies Intersessional Working Group, as we do have a mandate to do this work in this working group. And finally, recommendation F, we would suggest to add at the beginning, remind parties to consider the appropriate use of pre-convention permitting, so that this recommendation is being addressed to the right part, to the parties which must do that.
Thank you, Switzerland. I'm opening the floor to members of the Standing Committee. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Chair. The North American region would like to thank the Animals Committee for this report and express our support for the recommendations outlined in the document. We believe these set of recommendations could improve reporting of trade in CITES-listed sharks and rays, and we support their adoption. We also support the recommendation in 5E of the document, but we note that that is a responsibility of the parties, not the Standing Committee. So we support an edit to 5E that would read, encourage parties to, at the beginning of that statement. Thank you.
Thank you, the United States. I give the floor to New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Oceania appreciates the valuable work done by the Animals Committee and agrees that the 5 recommendations are appropriately considered by the Standing Committee, either the Intersessional Working Group on Sharks or other existing intersessional working groups, as the Chair of the Animals Committee has suggested, and we agree with the amendment made by the United States just now. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. Open the floor to observer parties. I open the floor to observer organizations. I give the floor to the European Union.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We support what we have just heard from New Zealand, and we also suggest that we invite the WCO to join the working group, or alternatively to a potential meeting of the working group looking at the HS codes. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. And I do believe the gentleman from Mozambique, you had a comment on this document.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On these documents, Mozambique believes that the data indicated underreported by CITES and that the deliver of the full study first described in decision 18221 and rolled over into decision 19223 on the mismatch between catch and trade levels of CITES listed sharks and rays should remain a top priority, but we consider the need to have financial and technical support to develop country studies on shark fins and meat trade at its hub and traceability mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mozambique. I open the floor to observer organizations. Okay. Give me 1 second, please. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to focus on the committee right now. And so we have the recommendations in document 67.2. And so there is general agreement with the recommendations in the document. There was a few edits proposed by the North American region, as well as some clarification and insertions by the chair of the Animals Committee. And so what I have here is agreement that the Standing Committee agrees to the recommendation A of encouraging parties to report trade of sharks and rays using the preferred terms and units as identified in the latest guidance for the preparation and submission of CITES annual reports at the species level, and consider the addition of taxon-specific terms to assist in reporting. And then in light of what was proposed, where it was clarified by the chair of the Animals Committee, I have linked in B and C together and into one recommendation of reminding parties of the provisions in paragraph 8 of the resolution Conf 12.6, Rev Cop COP 18, on the conservation and management of sharks, on expanding national classification systems for collecting and reporting data on shark trade, and reminds the Secretariat of the provisions in paragraph 9 of the same resolution to monitor discussions within the World's Customs Organization as it relates to sharks. I can read that again if you would like to hear it again. Is there agreement, general agreement with that? I'm seeing some head nods. Okay, so the committee agrees to that revised recommendation as just read by myself on the floor. And then we have recommendation D. The committee agrees to encourage parties to use the available HCS codes when reporting trade in annual trade reports. And then we have the last the recommendation E, as amended by the North American region, to encourage parties to consider the development of new digital reporting and traceability mechanisms. And the last recommendation, there seems to be agreement on, to remind parties to consider the appropriate use of pre-convention permitting for different sharks and rays products for specimens that meet the requirements of Resolution Comp 13.6, Rev Cop 18, on implementation of Article 7, Paragraph 2 concerning pre-convention specimens. Was there anything that I missed? I will note all of the comments that were made on the floor. And with that, I close this agenda, this document, and we will take up the recommendations in the report from the Secretariat in 67.3. I invite comments on document 67.3, the report of the Secretariat, Sharks and Rays. Give the floor to the Standing Committee for comments. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Chair. The North American region would like to express its appreciation to the Secretariat for Standing Committee 77, Doc 67.3 on sharks and rays. We take note of the progress made on implementation of decisions 19.222 to 19.224. We strongly support the Secretariat's recommendation to update both the guidelines for the preparation and submission for CITES annual reports and the guidelines for the preparation and submission of CITES annual illegal trade report for the purposes of including explicit guidance on reporting on specimens taken from areas beyond national jurisdiction. We also agree that this should be reported at SC 78. Having clear guidelines will support capacity building, workshops, and consistency of processes across parties. We also support the Secretariat's recommendation to request the Standing Committee's Intersessional Working Group on Sharks and Rays to consider the non-scientific aspects of the responses to notification 2023/027 Assessing this information will help inform the working group's mandate. In addition, we would like to recommend the Standing Committee's Intersessional Working Group on Sharks and Rays help identify potential solutions to address the challenges associated with transport of biological samples for research and data collection purposes as a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. The United States, can you just read that, the new recommendation for the Standing Committee Intersessional Working Group on Sharks and Rays to identify
potential solutions to address the challenges associated with the transport of biological samples for research and data collection purposes as a priority.
Thank you. The United States, I give the floor to New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Oceania is grateful to the Secretariat for preparing this paper and its annexes and for the capacity building efforts they've made globally. It's pleasing to note that the CITES reporting of landings derived from captures made on the high seas, or ABNJ, has improved markedly from previous analysis that showed only one party reporting introduction of CITES-listed sharks from the high seas. Determining the reasons behind the apparent mismatch between trade data of CITES-listed species in CITES, RFMO databases and FAO database, and what is believed to be an international trade is a very high priority, as we saw from the paper on oceanic whitetips from the Maldives, Doc 67.1. Oceania can align itself very much with the North American region in its comments, and also we fully support their suggested amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. I'll open the floor to a few observer parties. Observer organizations. WCS, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm making this intervention on behalf of 10 observer organizations and will provide a written list for the record. We note that document 67.3 contains information compiled by the Secretariat on reported trade in shark and ray products, but that this trade is significantly underreported when compared to peer-reviewed studies of East Asian shark fin markets. As such, we welcome the news that the Missing Sharks report contained in Decision 19.223, paragraph C, has been commissioned, and we eagerly await the results of this study to progress issues around the clear underreporting of CITES-listed shark and ray trade. More widely, we welcome the progress made by the Secretariat and many parties on the implementation of the shark and ray listings detailed in these documents, while noting that a range of implementation tools that facilitate NDF and customs-level implementation are available, and that as shark-focused NGOs, we'd be happy to discuss their use with any interested parties to ensure better implementation and compliance with these listings. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, WCS. So I'm not seeing any more comments on this item. We have the recommendations in paragraph 20 of document 67.3. There seems to be general agreement on the recommendations in the document, as well as I heard the Oceania region support the additional recommendation made by the United States. And so the Standing Committee agrees to recommendations A, B, and C in the document, as well as the additional recommendation that invites the Standing Committee Sharks and Rays Intersessional Working Group to identify potential solutions to address the challenges associated with transport of biological samples and biological samples for research and data collection as a priority. Okay, with that, I close this agenda item 67.3 and move on to the next item, which is 33.7, the application of Article 13 in Ecuador. And I give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce that document.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair, out of consideration for the interpreters, I'm not going to try and give in 3 minutes what I prepared for a 10-minute presentation. I'll try and say less and stay to the point. Document 33.7 looks at the report and recommendations of the mission that took place from the 12th to the 15th of May 2023, just after the regional workshop on CITES, fisheries and NDFs in Latin America and the Caribbean, which took place in Manta in Ecuador, and which was organized in cooperation with our main partner, FAO, for these fisheries matters. We'd like to thank Ecuador for holding and hosting the technical workshop and for the outings and all the care that was taken in a rigorous, transparent way for the technical mission. Ecuador committed to work immediately on establishing quotas for harvesting and trade in sharks, and they also committed to continuing to work in a coordinated manner with all the relevant institutions for the implementation of CITES, including in making automatic the use of information and systematic the issuance of CITES permits and the production of NDFs. Peru is one of the major exporters of shark fins in the world, but not all the fins that come from Peru are national. Many come from Ecuador, and that includes fins from Appendix 2 listed shark species. These cargo tend to cross by land through the Tumbes border in cargo terminals, and then they are transported to Lima, where then they are re-exported towards Asia via maritime routes. In 2021, there was a concentration mainly on these species, Alopia pelagicus, and then there was Carcharinus falciformis, Alopia superciliosus, and Icerus osirhynchus. All of these species are listed in Appendix 2. The Secretariat calls the attention of the committee to the discrepancies in trade figures that were reported by Peru and Ecuador in 2021. The Secretariat also congratulates the authorities of Ecuador and Peru for all the work that has been done to establish a framework that could be used by other parties that are developing control of the whole chain, starting from capture, harvesting, and right through to the mobilization of the product. The Standing Committee could look at the recommendations in paragraph 58, which includes compliance measures. And in anticipation of the fact that some parties may have some suggestions for the recommendations, and in the interest of using our time the most effectively, I would invite you to consider the best way of how we deal this, maybe by inviting the parties to look at the revised text and to then produce and provide that to the committee later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat, and I give the floor to Ecuador.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair, and we'd like to thank the Secretariat for document 33.7. As we have heard, we have a report of the mission that took place in May this year. This allowed CITES to verify the traceability process as well as the legality checking. We have an action plan, which is a national action plan, which has been in place since 2006, and we have been updating it, and it's been re-evaluated in 2020 to 2024. Our plan was recently revised. And we have national legislation which bans the fishery and finning and the landing of full fish. And we look at the species of shark, and we have monitoring of the fisheries and tuna fishing industry, and we have a long line fishing industry, which is also monitored. In some cases, we have cooperation with countries such as the USA, Canada, and help from FAO. In 2007, we set up a monitoring system which includes 300 inspectors for fisheries, and we have a virtual platform with a customs system so that accredited companies put their request in there and enter all their export data and all their traceability data. We welcome, therefore, the assistance and the congratulations that have come to us, and we know that there are still improvements to be made, so we would invite the Secretariat to encourage cooperation and work on providing more assistance through things such as the compliance assistance process. We think that, in particular, with areas such as the artisanal fisheries, we saw the impact of the El Niño phenomenon, which has had a great deal of impact on socio-economic life. We think that Article 13 of the Convention allows for opportunities so that we can put forward all information to correct situations. We're working on NDFs, and we have already included export quotas. We are entering a new period of government in a few weeks, and so we commit to undertake and to adopt the recommendations and to work on them in the next 120 days. So we would like to put forward a partial amendment to the recommendation in paragraph 58A, which we hope will be well received by the Standing Committee. I'm available if you would like me to read this amendment proposal now for the recommendation, or if you would prefer, as was suggested by the Secretariat, we send this jointly with other interested countries so that it can be presented to the full committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ecuador. I'm going to go with the latter, to just hold it, and if we have more amendments to the recommendations, we'll consolidate them and give them to the Secretariat and bring them back. And so now, with that, I give the floor to Peru.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'd like to thank the Secretariat for the drawing up of the document which reflects the situation of trade in sharks in Ecuador and Peru. Compared to the hydrobiological species, we have national legislation which allows us to implement the decisions and resolutions of the conventions, ensuring that we have traceability, sustainability, and legality of specimens of fauna and flora included and listed in the appendices. We see that there are aspects for improvement on the use of hydrobiological resources, and we commit to ensuring that both the administrative authorities that cover the flora and fauna and those that cover hydrobiological resources work and cooperate with the scientific authorities and the compliance authorities to ensure we improve traceability of our species in the category. In our country, shark fishing is an activity that is artisanal, and the main product is meat for the national product, because it is so it makes that fin trade a secondary trade. Since 2016, Peru has forbidden shark finning, and if sharks are captured, the whole shark must be landed so that the species can be identified as whether it is listed or not in CITES appendices. We would like to reiterate the importance of having the measures to be able to implement CITES mandates, and there's a need to strengthen the work linked to hydrobiological resources, as well as ensuring that studies of populations and stocks in the South Pacific are carried out with the support of the regional fisheries authorities and organizations, and with all the necessary tools to identify the products which work with the control. And so we value the support that CITES can give us in the future by carrying out a mission to our country to provide us with the necessary technical assistance to strengthen our national capacities for shark and other aquatic species. On the other hand, we would like to indicate that Peru has been working in coordination with Ecuador to have a better linkage in our work and to assist the country with the issuance of NDFs, which for sharks, which will look at the volumes and quotas that are destined for export. And it's also important to say that an important instrument for the management of sharks in Peru will be the National Plan for the Conservation and Management of Sharks, rays, and related species that we are currently updating in a participatory manner with the involved actors and stakeholders and working within our regulatory framework and on training and awareness raising. And to conclude, Madam Chair, Peru would like to inform you that we are continuing our efforts to reduce illegal trafficking in wildlife species, and we have increased the sanctions for crimes against flora, fauna, and aquatic resources. Thank you.
And I give the floor now to members of the committee to provide their comments on this document. I give the floor to New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Oceania would like to thank the Secretariat for compiling this paper and for conducting missions to Ecuador and Peru. We recall that the CITES Secretariat and shark-focused NGOs have conducted a number of capacity-building training workshops in these countries to assist with the implementation of the listings of commercially important shark species in the CITES appendices. Peru and Ecuador appear to be at different stages in their preparations to fully implement CITES regulations, but we heard from Peru just now that the two parties are working closely together and making good progress towards full implementation. Some of the issues identified in the paper have arisen from the misunderstanding that under CITES, bycatch is not treated differently from a targeted catch. Given that many by-caught sharks are alive when brought alongside or on board fishing vessels, and post-release survival is high for many shark species with the exception of hammerheads, we suggest an additional recommendation be added. That is that Ecuador encourage the release of live by-caught CITES-listed sharks rather than landing them unless a proportion of the quota set under a positive NDF allows for this. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. I give the floor to Poland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The EU and its member states have several concerns with the compliance case. We regret that extremely late submission of the document in all language versions. This made it very difficult to analyze the case with all the attention that it requires. Having sufficient time is essential, especially in the compliance case where the stakes involved are very high. We would like also to encourage the Secretariat to pronounce more clearly in its report the specific facts and the rationale for the concrete compliance proceedings. That being said, we are concerned about the levels of trade reported and the shortcomings outlined in the report regarding the implementation of the Convention in Ecuador and Peru. We agree that there is a need for urgent measures in both countries. Nevertheless, we would appreciate an explanation from the Secretariat as to why only Ecuador is addressed in Recommendation A. We are in agreement with the general approach taken in the recommendations of the Secretariat. However, we think that these recommendations could be revised to give Ecuador and Peru both precise guidance and enough flexibility to identify and implement the appropriate measures to comply fully with the CITES Convention. Our suggested changes to the recommendations are significant, therefore we have submitted them in writing to the Secretariat. Our main proposition is to set a 90-day time limit for Ecuador and respectively Peru to produce NDFs and LAFs for the CITES-listed Elasmo branch addressed in the report, to the satisfaction of the Secretariat and the Chair of the Animals Committee and the Standing Committee, respectively. Should this not be achieved, commercial trade with Ecuador and Peru in specimens of the named species shall be suspended. And I have a question to you, Madam Chair, if we shall proceed with presenting our recommendations? No, okay. They were already provided to the Secretariat, so if needed, we can come back to them. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Poland. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Chair. The North American region would like to thank the Secretariat for the report and for conducting technical missions to Peru and Ecuador to better understand the details and context surrounding the significant volume of trade in supposedly incidental catch of CITES-listed shark specimens between the two parties. We are concerned by the Secretariat's findings and support the recommendations in the document, with some edits that we would be pleased to provide in writing, given there are many. As with the region's proposal for Doc 33.3, the bulk of our edits are intended to identify the specific compliance issues for each recommendation rather than substantive edits. However, we would draw attention to recommendation A, where we would refine the substance for clarity. We would add precision to the suspension of trade to be CITES-listed shark species from Ecuador or with country of origin, Ecuador. We would make the same precision in recommendation I. We would add additional clarity. We would additionally clarify the measures needed in recommendation A as follows. Parties suspend trade in specimens of CITES-listed shark species from Ecuador or with country of origin Ecuador until such time as Ecuador takes measures to ensure the appropriate implementation of Article 4 with respect to non-detriment findings and legal acquisition findings, notably through establishing requirements for sustainable levels of catch, including bycatch, determining fishing capacity and bycatch limits, and establishing catch and trade quotas for sharks based on available scientific data. Thank you.
Thank you, North American region. I give the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Chair. Japan appreciates the work of the Secretariat for preparing this document, and Japan echoes the proposed amendment recommendation A proposed by US. And taking this opportunity, Japan would like to remind one important point as mentioned by our colleague from Poland. Document SC 77.doc33.7 was uploaded on 5th of November. It means the only one day before the meeting. As you are aware, the SC's rule of procedure requires meeting documents to be uploaded at least 45 days before the meeting. Member states should be given sufficient time for consideration, especially for matters that affect us as a whole, such as the suspension of the trade. Japan requests the Secretariat to take note take into account as we mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. I give the floor to Honduras.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you, Madam. We feel that this recommendation 58A, where there's talk about trade suspension for these Ecuador species, should take into account the comment that has been made with respect to the change in government. We do know that there can be some flexibility with respect to our procedural dealing with procedures, so we should take on board what Ecuador has had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Honduras. I give the floor to Brazil.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'd like to thank the Secretariat for having drafted this document. We would also like to thank Ecuador and Peru for the information that they have provided. We have heard what Ecuador has just had to say, and we do think that these proposals should be taken into account. We have still have to see what Ecuador has to propose. Maybe it would be best if the parties, as the Secretariat suggested, worked together to draft something that they could submit to the committee a little bit later. That would be perhaps one way of proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I'm going to give the floor to the Secretariat to answer the question that was posed on the floor regarding Recommendation A.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Y
Thank you, Madam. First of all, I would like to apologize to parties and observers for the fact that this document has come to you rather late. It was initially drafted in Spanish, and that was a little bit late, so we are very sorry that it was provided late, but then again, we're doing what we can. It's a little tough to get all this done in time. Now, we're looking back to the Lyon meeting where Ecuador was first on the agenda. This is a stepwise process, so the idea was to have a mission to Ecuador, and then if the committee so decides, there will be a mission to Peru to try and fully understand the whole issue. That explains the fact that these recommendations focus mainly on Ecuador. And we wanted to give you some idea of the interaction between the two countries on this matter. And we are talking about bycatch that is really very significant for a country that actually prohibits shark fishing. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. I'm going to open the floor quickly for a few observer parties. I give the floor to Mexico.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the light of the information we've had from Ecuador on shark management, which does seem to be in keeping with the Secretariat's recommendations, we would support the amendment proposed by Ecuador to the recommendations in the Secretariat's document. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. I will open the floor to take two observer organizations, and I give the floor to Guatemala.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam. Guatemala was present at the manta rays workshop, and we would like to thank the FAO and CITES for having enabled that participation. We were able then to witness the efforts that Ecuador and Peru are making on this whole question, and that is why we would suggest that the committee look favorably upon Ecuador's proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Chile.
buenos días.
Good morning, Madam Chair. We would also like to grant Ecuador the 120 days leeway for the submission of their report as suggested. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. I give the floor to Traffic.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam. This is a statement on behalf of Traffic and WWF. We agree with what is laid down in document 33.7 on the need to strengthen the traceability of shark products along the supply chain. There is reference made to national traceability here. However, given that shark product supply chains tend to be multinational, as is indeed the case before us, we do think that there needs to be an international approach when it comes to traceability. That is why Traffic and WWF would suggest that Ecuador, Peru, and other parties involved in multinational supply chains consider the adoption or adaptation of their traceability systems so that the longer multinational chains are reflected in them, which is why we would like to make availability to any party that is interested the shark traceability system that Traffic has developed. It has been successful in Australia and in South Africa, and we are most willing to cooperate with any party interested in implementing it. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Traffic. And so I'm going to propose, since we did have a bunch of edits and we have heard some new information from Ecuador and Peru, that we have an in-session drafting group to work on the recommendations in paragraph 58 and to review and revise the recommendations in paragraph 58 of the document 33.7 and present these to the committee for consideration. And so what I heard from the floor was interest in reviewing and revising from Ecuador, provided some input, as well as having Peru in this drafting group, New Zealand representing Oceania, the United States representing the North American region, and I believe Poland also had some input and edits. Japan would also like to be involved. I will add Japan, and I will ask Brazil, are you able to chair this in-session drafting group? I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. And we will revisit this hopefully tomorrow. The next item with this, I have suspended this agenda item, and we will now move on to document 33.13, Totoaba. We will introduce both documents at the same time, starting with document SC 77, 33.13.1, the report by Mexico, which would be followed by 33.13.2, the report of the Secretariat. I give the floor to Mexico to introduce their document.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. I would like to give you an update on the report in 33.131. We're going to be giving you a sense of what we've been doing under 1974. By way of background, we should recall that 17.145 to 151 decisions that were adopted at COP17 that was held in Johannesburg in 2016 had led to our country to have a trilateral meeting between China, the United States, and Mexico on dealing with illegal Totoaba fishing. We met in California from August 23 to 5 in 2017. During that meeting, we agreed to set up a trilateral contact group in order to ensure that we can do something against illegal Totoaba fishing in order to strengthen cooperation with respect to investigations, and this involving all three countries. Mexico, as chair of this trilateral contact group, and acting for China and the United States as well, welcomes the fact that in September 23, the three parties agreed the terms of reference for the trilateral contact group on the implementation of the law. We welcome these good results from 2 years of negotiation where everyone was committed to obtaining these terms of reference, which provide a good working framework for the trilateral group. We have a document with the terms of reference, and we're happy to make them available to the Standing Committee and parties. They are an annex to the document. The first meeting of the contact group is to be convened, and we hope to meet in the first quarter of next year. We are very grateful to the CITES national authorities and the permanent representatives of Mexico here in Geneva, and also to the Secretariat for their contributions and support in the course of these trilateral negotiations. We would invite the committee to take our headway into account, and we will certainly keep the Secretariat informed of later progress. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mexico. I give the floor now to the Secretariat.
Thank you very much, Chair, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Document 33.13.2 provides reporting on the implementation of the decisions and recommendations on Totoaba adopted at COP19 and agreed by SC75. The document highlights information provided by parties in response to notification to the parties 2023/069 on activities they conducted to address crimes related to Totoaba. In this regard, the Secretariat notes that it also on 18 October, after the document prepared for the present meeting was published, received a reply to the notification from Japan. The party in its response stated that it has the necessary measures in place to implement CITES and that Japan has no record regarding Totoaba specimens entering or exiting the country. Further, parties will recall that the committee at SC75 requested Mexico to develop and implement a compliance action plan on Totoaba. The document prepared for the present meeting provides reporting on activities conducted in this regard and the progress made by Mexico with implementation of its compliance action plan. The Secretariat provides its detailed observations and conclusions regarding the progress made by Mexico in Annex 5 to the document. The document highlights that although good progress was made, further continued efforts are needed. As you know, ladies and gentlemen, illegal fishing of Totoaba and the threat this poses to the vaquita remains a matter of great concern, and parties of origin, transit and destination must continue to take action and scale up their collaborative efforts. In this regard, the Secretariat highlights the importance of collaboration between China, Mexico and the United States in fighting Totoaba trafficking, as well as the urgency to operationalize the trilateral contact group between the parties. Considering the key roles of China and the United States as parties affected by Totoaba specimen trafficking, the Secretariat also proposes technical missions to these two parties. In addition, an update on progress with the study on vaquita and Totoaba is provided in the document. The Secretariat worked with the Standing Committee through its chair to revise and finalize the terms of reference for the study, and the final terms of reference are available in Annex 6 to the document. Work on the study is at present ongoing for it to be ready for consideration at SC78. The recommendations prepared for consideration by the committee are presented in paragraph 46 of the document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, the Secretariat. And so I open the floor to comments from the Standing Committee and give the floor to Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving Indonesia the floor. Indonesia will make this statement on behalf of the ASEAN Standing Committee members, which are Indonesia, Kuwait, and Japan. First of all, Indonesia would like to commend the Secretariat for its hard work on this very important issue. Indonesia, Kuwait, and Japan congratulate Mexico for her rapid progress with the implementation of its compliance action plan. We commend the good cooperation and collaboration made by Mexico, the United States, and China as the range, transit, and consumer countries in combating the illegal trade in the Totoaba fish issue. We strongly believe that addressing illegal trade requires a good faith and comprehensive collaboration between all countries affected by the illegal trade process, which are the range, transit, and consumer countries. In that connection, Indonesia, Japan, and Kuwait supports the Secretariat's proposed way forward, as reflected in paragraph 46, including to request China and the United States of America to invite the Secretariat for a technical mission to have a better understanding of the measures and activities being implemented by these parties. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. I give the floor to Chad, and I will also open the floor for observer parties.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to thank the Secretariat and Mexico for reporting on this situation in these documents and their annexes. These documents were published late, and it was difficult for us to really keep up with the situation, particularly since a number of the documents were available only in Spanish initially. We do welcome the Secretariat's efforts to provide us with a summary account of the documents submitted by Mexico, providing an update with the measures being taken on Totoaba with respect to these documentation. However, we would really welcome having a little bit more time to take all of this information in, particularly the information provided by Mexico in their statement giving us an update on the situation. Given the technical nature of these documentations and given the example that has provided by the African Elephant Coalition, we would suggest that we have an advisory group that would be in a position to look carefully and objectively at all of this information provided by Mexico. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Chad, and I give the floor to Mexico.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We refer to 3313.1, but we would like now to give you our statement on document 3313.2. Thank you, Chair, the Secretariat, and members of delegations for this opportunity to address you. We would like to give you an account of the work that Mexico has been done in the context of the action plan to prevent the illegal fishing and trading of Totoaba, which we have done this year with help from CITES. As you know, for some years now, we have had a strategy in the Upper California Gulf to protect the Totoaba as much as, and the vaquita as much as possible. However, in recent years, since 23, we have made some notable and historic, indeed, accomplishments. First of all, the plan of action is a noteworthy accomplishment because we have had managed to bring together a number of groups in Mexico. So we have worked with CITES, the UNESCO World Heritage Committee, and we have adopted the plan as the document for Mexico with respect to measures that can be taken with respect to conservation in the area. Now, as we have a high sense of social responsibility, we've attempted to have an ongoing dialogue with the fishing communities in the Upper California Gulf. This has meant that we've been able to work with communities. We've, for instance, been able to participate in marine life spotting cruises, have workshops on strengthening the social fabric, and had an identification program so that we can look at the legal catches in San Felipe using holograms. The most important and historic accomplishment, however, is that we were delighted to see that for the first time there has been evidence of a reversal of the negative trend of the vaquita population trend there, and we have innovative measures now, such as blockades, which have made it impossible for there to be any fishing in the prohibited area. And this has, in fact, been corroborated by organizations of significance to the region, like Sea Shepherd. We also have the terms of reference, which has already been mentioned, for the Trilateral Contact Group on the implementation of the law involving China, the United States, and Mexico. This occurred on the 23rd of September, and it is indeed a landmark achievement. And we are going to be able to work together in order to ensure that we can work together to ensure the law is implemented by all three countries. We would like to pay tribute to the CITES national authorities and the permanent representatives of China and the US in Geneva for their help on this. Given these positive developments, we're going to continue working with civil society, international organizations, communities, and universities in order to ensure that we continue to build on these positive accomplishments. We would like to thank the Secretariat for Document 3313-2, which has been put before the committee. And we have made, and as we have done in the past since COP16, we feel that we have a fair account here of what has been done and what remains to be done. And this does involve all CITES members in the fulfillment of decisions and recommendations that have been adopted in recent years. Given our biodiversity and this convention, we are committed to continue to work implementing this successful plan of action. We have earmarked more than $4.5 million on a monthly basis for the fulfillment of this plan of action. We have worked with transparency and commitment, and we updated our report on the 15th of October, and it will be submitted to the Secretariat so it can be shared with all of you. In conclusion, we are proud to say that we have accomplished much, and we will continue to do this. However, it has to be made absolutely clear that the whole Totoaba and Vaquita problem will not be solved without international community involvement, because this is a matter of international illegal trade. That is why, as we have said before, we need to ensure that we work along established channels so that countries of origin, transit, and destination, as agreed in October of 21. We would like to call upon all parties for their solidarity, as well as for observers and civil society throughout the world, to live up to this historic responsibility, because we all have to live up to what is expected of us as parties to this convention. And that means that you'll be able to help us ensure that we protect what is part of our shared heritage. Thank you, Madam.
Mexico. I give the floor to China as a concerned party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing this document and to commend the various efforts made by Mexico and the United States in protecting the Totoaba. China also welcomes the proposed technical missions of the Secretariat to China and the United States. The government of China is fully committed to implement the terms of reference of the Trilateral Enforcement Contact Group and to cooperate in combating the illegal trade in Totoaba's swim bladders, known as Totoaba Mole, in order to save the Totoaba and the Vaquita from extinction. I would like to take this opportunity to briefly report on the progress made by China in cracking down on the illegal trade in Totoaba swim bladders. China also has upgraded the legal status of Totoaba to a national first-class protected species of wild animal and prohibited the sale and consumption of its swim bladder. China's law enforcement agencies have prioritized the anti-smuggling of Totoaba swim bladders and seized some illegally traded Totoaba's swim bladders. In collaboration with conservation organizations, both national and international, such as China Wildlife Conservation Association, NRDC, Traffic, WCS, Wild Aid, IFAW, WWF, The competent Department for Wildlife Conservation in China has carried out a number of public awareness campaigns on the conservation of the totoaba. We are in the meantime planning to collaborate with the CITES Secretariat and the relevant organizations in designing and implementing more targeted demand reduction activities by following the CITES guidance on demand reduction. We are already in communication with the CITES Secretariat on such initiatives. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. And I give the floor to the United States as a concerned party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States appreciates the report prepared by the Secretariat and why we acknowledge and appreciate the recent progress made by Mexico towards implementation of its compliance action plan. We are still concerned by the lack of compliance with and enforcement of Mexico's September 2020 regulatory agreement, which regulates fishing activity in the upper Gulf of California. This remains a critical and urgent situation as illegal harvest of tutuaba has been a persistent problem in the upper Gulf that continues to jeopardize the survival of the vaquita, a species that's at the edge of extinction. The United States has seen a recent increase in the number of seizures of illegal tutuaba swim bladders from Mexico. So far in 2023, there have been at least 10 seizures of tutuaba swim bladders, including 2 very large shipments. The first being in April of 2023 by U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers that seized 270 swim bladders with an estimated value of $2.7 million US. Last month, Customs and Border Protection officers seized an additional 91 tutuaba swim bladders, which has an estimated value of $1 million US. The increase in illegal trafficking of tutuaba swim bladders originating from Mexico gives us reason to question the effectiveness of Mexico's compliance action implementation. The United States strongly supports the Secretariat's recommendations to Mexico regarding preparing a comprehensive progress report on the implementation of the Compliance Action Plan for SC-78. However, the United States does not support many of the conclusions reached by the Secretariat in Annex 5 to document 33.13.2 on the number of milestones in the compliance action plans that have been deemed by the Secretariat as achieved. In particular, the United States has concerns that the focus of Mexico's reporting on the activity within the zero tolerance area, yet provides little to no evidence on reduced use of prohibited gill nets, including for shrimp within the parts of the vaquita refuge that lie outside the zero tolerance area. As identified in the 2020 vaquita survey, vaquitas occupy habitat outside of the zero tolerance area. So the continued use of gill nets throughout the vaquita refuge prevents the recovery of the vaquita and puts the species further at risk of extinction. Furthermore, it does not adhere to the gill net prohibition called for in Mexico's September 2020 regulatory agreement. In addition, the United States is concerned that the period of reporting represents a period of time when fishing activity was at the lowest in the seasonal cycle and does not reflect activity and enforcement during peak fishing seasons, including the period of time when illegal fishing for tutuaba occurs, which has historically been from January to April. As such, the United States proposes a modification to Recommendation C, II, to ask that Mexico continue reporting on its implementation of all actions identified in the compliance action plans at SC-78 to ensure continued monitoring progress, including during peak fishing seasons. And if allowed, I can read the amended recommendation with our proposed changes.
Not at this time. Thank you, the United States.
Sorry, just a little bit more.
Okay, I just try to bring it to closure, please.
So regarding the technical mission the United States would welcome, a technical mission to highlight the measures we've been implementing in the U.S. to combat trafficking of illegal tutuaba, and we welcome other parties sharing their effort. But given that the United States is not primarily a destination country and is more of a transit country, we would suggest that maybe a third technical mission to Mexico be more appropriate, or have a combination mission to both the United States and Mexico to highlight both of our efforts in enforcement. And lastly, we would support Chad's recommendation to form a technical advisory group, as we believe having additional expertise accessing Mexico's compliance action plan would be beneficial to Mexico, as this advisory group could help provide valuable input to assist Mexico in meeting their conservation goals. Thank you.
Thank you, the United States. And so now I'm going to take more comments from members of the Standing Committee. You have the floor, Honduras.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I am going to speak on behalf of the Central American region. In our region, we would like to express and recognize the response from Mexico with their action plan. Without this action plan, I think the vaquita marina would already be extinct. And we would like to express our support for the plan. We know it can be improved, but we consider that these efforts, despite the fact we are speaking about a fairly small population of vaquita, it needs a great deal of support. So we'd call on all parties to reaffirm their commitment with what we have seen from Mexico, and we highlight the importance of adopting complementary measures so that we can combat illegal trafficking on an international level. It's important to always have improved customs controls in the countries through which the specimens could go, and to work on improving this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Honduras. I give the floor to Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The intervention is by Switzerland as a party to the government, not as a member of the Standing Committee. So if there are other members of the Standing Committee, they could or should first take the floor.
Okay, thank you. So I give the floor to Brazil.
Señora Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor once more. I am speaking in my national capacity. Brazil recognizes the progress made by Mexico in the application of its action plan for Totoaba, and we also understand that on the subject, as in so many others that we've already covered at this Standing Committee, any solution needs coordinated efforts from all involved countries, including transit and destination countries of species. So we see as positive the information that the trilateral contact group has managed to define its terms of reference. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I can give the floor. Kenya, are you speaking in your national capacity or as a member of the African region?
Madam Chair, I will be speaking as Kenya, as a national capacity.
New Zealand, are you speaking as a member of the Oceania region? Yep. Yes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to acknowledge the good progress made in implementing the Compliance Action Plan. We're still concerned, obviously, at the ongoing high levels of illegal trade in Totoaba swim bladders and the effect that the illegal fishing for Totoaba is likely to be having on the critically endangered vaquita. We support the recommendation by Chad for a technical advisory group, and also support recommendations from the United States to recommendation C, 3 little I's, on continued reporting and for a third technical mission. Thank you.
The United Kingdom, are you speaking in as your role as a, no, as a party? Okay. All right, I open the floor to observer parties now. I'm going to take a few observer parties. Okay, I'm going to close the list now. And I give the floor to Mexico.
Gracias. Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We would very much like to thank all parties for their comments, and we are also grateful for the expression from the United States on the acceptance of a mission to their country, and also by China. As Brazil has said, the response and assistance for all issues that CITES deal with must have the response and commitment of all the countries involved. What we would like to comment on is that we also need to preserve the principle of fairness. Mexico has presented an action plan with progress and progress made with the action plan. However, we have not yet received a report on action carried out by other countries that are also responsible on the same subject, which is why we welcome and recognize these proposed visits. And we suggest that before another mission is suggested to our country, we've already had some, we could hear some reports on what transit and destination countries are doing to control illegal trade in Totoaba. The reports were carried out and prepared in conjunction with the Secretariat and in a timely and due manner, so that all the parties could read them. Despite the increase in seizures, we would call on the use of the agreed channel, so we receive a formal notification of every seizure. That would help us work with the problem. I think I'm now running out of time, but thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. I give the floor to India.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We welcome the actions taken and reported by the various parties in the document. We wish to note with pain the extinction alert on vaquita issued by the International Whaling Commission in August 2023. We sincerely hope that the concerned parties would take this challenge and make all efforts in preventing the species from going into extinction. Regular and scientific monitoring, round-the-clock patrolling of the habitat using technology, and possible ban of fishing in the vaquita habitat, if required for a few years, could be considered as part of the conservation efforts for saving this species. Active cooperation of all related parties in implementation of the decisions with regard to this species would set an example to the world. As it is an obligation for all the parties to the convention to prevent the species from extinction, we suggest that the word request in paragraph 46 C, F, and G in SC 77.33.13.2 be substituted with the word urge. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. I give the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Canada would like to thank the Secretariat for providing the updates listed in document 33.13.2. Canada would also like to thank Mexico and all of the contributors for the urgent and critical work to address issues impacting not only the Totoaba but also the vaquita. Canada broadly supports the recommendations put forward in this document. We want to ensure Canada currently has no case files or known entities linked to the movement of illegal trade of Totoaba swim bladders. However, Canada is not immune to the potential trade entering our borders. Canada has and will continue to act responsibly to information received linking illegal movement of Totoaba. Canada is open to considering joint operations, sharing of information, and ensuring allegations of illicit activity are thoroughly examined. Canada broadly supports the recommendations put forward in this document. We want to ensure that our efforts in this forum are CITES-specific and thus complementary of other efforts to address issues facing not only the Totoaba, but also the critically endangered vaquita. Recognizing that actions are also being taken in respect of this issue from multiple angles in other international fora, such as the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, targeted Secretariat efforts in respect of CITES mandate would serve to complement such efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I give the floor to Senegal.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Senegal joins Mexico in its concerns on the situation of Totoaba and the enormous efforts made for the conservation of the species to avoid its extinction. So Senegal joins Chad in calling for a creation of a consultative technical group. Thank you.
Thank you, Senegal. I give the floor to Benin.
Okay. Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Benin would like to thank Mexico and the Secretariat for their documents and the annexes. And we all welcome the progress made and the resources that have been put into place to fight against the illegal fishing. But we are nevertheless concerned about the illegal activities linked to this virtually extinct species, as was recalled by the United States. So we stand and align ourselves with the position of Chad that a consultative and advisory group set up to assist Mexico with their work. Thank you.
Thank you, Benin. I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. Recognising the complexity of the situation in the Gulf of California and the challenges involved, the UK welcomes the progress made by Mexico to date in compiling their compliance action plan. Despite this, we are concerned that the actions, targets and milestones included in the plan are not measurable and fall short of what is urgently needed to meaningfully address illegal fishing, support effective enforcement, and to fully implement the September 2020 agreement to protect the Totoaba and support recovery of the vaquita. Time is running out for the critically endangered vaquita, and urgent action must be taken to fully implement the plan and the articles within the agreement to avoid its extinction. We also endorse the many comments made about the need for cooperation to support this effective action. We also support the United States of America's proposal that reporting should continue on progress made against all of the objectives in Mexico's compliance action plan. And we also welcome consideration of the proposal by Chad to establish a technical advisory group to provide expert and transparent technical oversight to the review of Mexico's implementation of its compliance action plan on Totoaba. Thank you.
Thank you, the United Kingdom. I give the floor to Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the Secretariat in Mexico for preparing and presenting the reports. Switzerland welcomes all the efforts to improve the situation around the Totoaba. As you all know, the future of another species, the vaquita, depends on it. Today, only 10 are left, the result of a long and sad story. As we heard at the site event on Monday, in 1975, the Scientific Committee of the IWC warned that the coastal distribution of the vaquita, where gillnet fisheries operate, presents a potential management problem. And as a consequence, the main cause of bycatch should be stopped by closing the Totoaba fishery in 1975. The same year, CITES came into force. In the 1995 annual progress report from Mexico to the IWC, it was stated that the Mexican government had taken measures to reduce bycatch by enforcing the closure of all commercial fisheries in the reserve zone created for the vaquita in the upper Gulf of California. We could add a long list of initiatives, discussions, resolutions, etc., etc. Despite them all, today, even in the zero-tolerance area, you still can observe on a daily basis activities potentially threatening the vaquita. The zero-tolerance area is 20 kilometers long and 12 kilometers wide. To give you a better idea, the Lake of Geneva is 72 kilometers long and 14 kilometers wide. The last almost the last almost 50 years showed that nice words and good intentions will not save the vaquita, only real action. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. I give the floor to the European Union for a brief intervention.
Thank you. The UN, its member states, and all of us in the CITES community are well aware of the importance of the conservation issue regarding the vaquita. We all want to contribute to measures that avoid the extinction of the species. We take note of the detailed report by Mexico on the implementation of the action plan and acknowledge the progress achieved so far, and at the same time, an ongoing effort is necessary, and current efforts and achievements may still have to be increased. We look forward to future reports by Mexico on its progress. Some areas where additional progress would appear to be really beneficial include the following: seizure and destruction of gill nets in the zero-tolerance zone and the area of the vaquita refugee in Mexico, further reduction of fishing vessels entering the zero-tolerance zone, if possible, down to zero, including sanctioning, uptake of alternative fishing gear by fishermen in the area. The EU and its member states agree with most of the recommendations proposed by the Secretariat. However, we would propose to continue reporting as much as possible without imposing reporting burdens where they are clearly unnecessary. For instance, with respect to action items that have to be implemented, and once they are implemented, there is no ongoing activity required. We note that in the Secretariat assessment, a number of reporting obligations on ongoing activities are phrased in a way that the Standing Committee is invited to encourage Mexico as opposed to request to report. On these points, we would like to know whether Mexico agrees and is planning to make these reports. The EU and its member states would like to raise the question whether the deadline for following action items can be moved forward in time and achieved quickly. Item 2.12, milestone 3, and integration of the operation of the tracking and location system through the command and control center of SEMAR. Current deadline is 1st of February 2024. Item 2.12, milestone 4, consolidation of the system to track minor, smaller vessels as a source of information and intelligence for competent authorities. Current deadline is 30 May 2024. And finally, item 4.4, milestones 2 and 3, they concern the implementation of the special marking and fishing equipment.
European Union, you're over your
Just
time.
one last.
Please wrap it up.
Yeah, we just want to say that in the context of international cooperation on enforcement, we'd like to mention that the EU and its member states are currently assessing how we could support Mexico, and bilateral consultations have already started in the fringes of the Standing Committee meeting. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. We have two more. Please keep your interventions brief. I give the floor to Guatemala and then to Argentina.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd just like to mention that Guatemala's borders with Mexico on the south, and we are therefore considering being able to share all information on any future seizures when it comes to Totoaba. And we are, of course, always available to collaborate with Mexico. And we are most pleased to hear about the trilateral contact group with the United States and China. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Argentina.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And in the interest of time, first of all, I'd like to thank Mexico and the Secretariat for the work. And we agree with what Chad and other delegations have suggested, that we have a setting up of a consultative advisory group. Thank you.
Thank you. Kenya, are you speaking as a individual party or as a Standing Committee member?
Kenya is speaking as a Kenya. We were wondering whether you cleared our name from the list of the speakers because we were requested to speak earlier.
Okay. I will give you the floor. I give the floor to Kenya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah. We were waiting for your attention.
You have my undivided attention, Kenya.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we'll be brief. Madam Chair, looking at the suite of decisions that have been taken, running decisions on Totoaba, it is clear that the issue of Totoaba and combating illegal trade in Totoaba is a complex issue. However, we would like to commend Mexico for the efforts that they have made towards implementation of the Compliance Action Plan. They would urge that if they continue with the engagement with China and the US, especially on their reporting on the TCG, the contact group, Trilateral Enforcement Contact Group, and also urge Mexico to expand the reporting, looking at the reporting on the detection of the vessels, like a period of April to July. It may not give us an indication of how much efforts are going into that and the seasons, as it has already been mentioned by previous speakers. Madam Chair, we'll again comment Chad. We align ourselves with the recommendation of Chad to Mexico on seeking assistance on a technical advisory group to facilitate or to assist in the implementation of the Compliance Action Plan. Finally, Madam Chair, we would support the recommendations contained in paragraph 46 of that 3.13.12 2. With the suggested amendments as suggested by US. At that point, we'll be looking at those recommendations. Thank you, Madam Chair. And we finally, we wish Mexico well to work towards the implementation of the Compliance Action Plan and clear that suite of decisions and save the vaquita as we save the Totoaba species. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kenya. I'm going to give the floor to the Secretary General.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all for your interventions. Thank you to Mexico for the presentation on the reports and your views on the reports. Madam Chair, I just want to bring up the issue of the call for having a technical advisory group or some sort of tag, which we do not, I can have my legal advisor say something about the relevant resolutions in CITES in a moment, but there are some concerns about setting up such an advisory group. You mentioned experts, and as you know, Mexico, as a party who's dealing with a compliance case, is sharing with the Secretariat some very sensitive information about enforcement. We are also dealing with international criminal organizations, so that this is dealt with a high degree of confidentiality. So we have some concerns about the composition of such an advisory group and what this would mean in terms of the information that is being shared with us from Mexico. It also has some resource implications, some time implications with consultations. I understand what the Standing Committee is trying to say about these independent views, but of course, once the Secretariat reviews the assessment or makes the assessment of the Compliance Action Plan of Mexico, if you have some concerns that in some areas things are not going as you wish, the Standing Committee and the Conference of the Parties, of course, have all the possibilities of making decisions that reflect those concerns that you have. But I am a little bit wondering if this would be something that can operate in such a situation of a compliance case with a party who is sharing with us such confidential information dealing with these criminal organizations. Maybe we can also get some legal advice in terms of resolution, but I know that under Resolution 14.3, we don't have anything that describes a technical advisory group to advise the Secretariat on such issues of compliance. Could I pass the floor to Mr. Vasquez, please?
Thank you, Madam Secretary General. And the Secretary would like to invite the Standing Committee to exercise some caution when you create new modalities to handle compliance cases. We operate within a framework which is provided for by Resolution 14.3 and Resolution 11.3. Any of these two resolutions mention technical advisory groups for handling compliance cases. If you have in mind the case of Madagascar, that's a different initiative created at the request of Madagascar that requested to have a group of parties concerned by the Madagascar case to advise them on the way forward for the specific case, but that was requested by Madagascar. So if you are planning to create a new modality to handle compliance cases, we have brought this to the attention of the committee before, and we suggested at the time a compliance subcommittee. The committee say no, it's not necessary. So I think that you need to go first to the COP and have this in one of the two resolutions that frame how to handle compliance cases before you proceed to create precedents that don't have any legal basis in the framework of the convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretariat. Do we have any comments on the notes from the Secretariat? So what do we have? We just had this one, all elements. Okay, well, I'm getting, I see that there is, I want to thank the interpreters really quickly for 5 to 10 more minutes while we wrap up this agenda item. There is support for the recommendations in paragraph 46. There was an edit made by the United States for recommendation C. Under little I is for Mexico to report on all of the objectives. So it would read, prepare a report for SC 78 of the 78th meeting of the Standing Committee, SC 78 on the progress with the implementation of all of the objectives in the Compliance Action Plan as highlighted, period. United States, can you provide that edit one more time, please?
Yeah, so the new recommendation C, little II, would read as following. Prepare a report for the 78th meeting of the Standing Committee on progress with implementation of targets and associated milestones in its Compliance Action Plan, period.
Is there support for that edit? Okay, so the Standing Committee agrees to the recommendations in paragraph 46 with the edit to CII to prepare a report to SC 78 of the 78th meeting of the Standing Committee on progress with the implementation of targets and associated milestones in its compliance plan. With that, I conclude this agenda item. And I take note of all of the comments made by the parties and the regional members, as well as Mexico and China and the United States on the floor. And just for 33.1, the recommendation is just to take note of that document. And so the Standing Committee takes note of that document, 33.13.1. And with that, I conclude these two agenda items. Oh, man. I believe there was two parties who got in there before I closed it out. So I give the floor, is United States, is it as the United States or the North American region? Indonesia, are you as the Indonesia or the Indonesia? Okay. You have the floor, Indonesia.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to reconfirm that there is no additional revision, including on this technical advisory group in the current recommendation.
Not at this point, but I see the United States has their, I give the floor to the United States, and I'll try to wrap it up at the end for clarity.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't hear any thoughts regarding the third technical mission to Mexico that we had recommended, or a combination mission to the US and Mexico.
Would the committee prefer that as a recommendation as opposed to taking note of it? Okay. So an additional recommendation would be for the Secretariat to undertake a third mission to Mexico to evaluate the implementation of their compliance action plan and to assess the ongoings of the issue on the ground and report back to the 78th meeting of the Standing Committee. Okay, with that. And then a request for the Secretariat would also be similar to all the compliance documents of changing there was another suggestion to change all of the language that was requesting Mexico and requesting the Secretariat and requesting China, Mexico, and the United States to urge. Is there support for that? I'm seeing head nods. So unless I see support, we'll keep the text in the document. Okay, we will keep the text in the document. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We welcome the idea of another mission to Mexico. We would, however, on the grounds of the principles of equity, it might be best to have that postponed until there are missions to transit and destination countries. Then you'll have a full understanding of the situation. After the transit and destination missions have taken place, Mexico would welcome another mission. Thank you, Madam.
I believe I heard on the floor that the United States has invited the Secretariat to come and visit, and I believe I also heard that China has also on the floor extended an invitation to visit, and so we would hope that all of these would be reported back by SC78. The committee takes note of your comment about the orders of the missions, but I'm going to defer to the Standing Committee. Is there a particular order, or is it okay for the Secretariat to work that out themselves? And all of these technical missions are subject to resources. All right. There wasn't a lot of support for an order of the missions, and so we'll just leave the recommendation as agreed upon by the Standing Committee. And I am going to close this agenda item out. We are going to break for lunch, and we will come back with marine turtles. We'll go through the rest of the marine issues, but the Secretariat has some housekeeping.
Thank you, Chair. A few important housekeeping notes. At 2 o'clock, we start with a small ceremony here, and at 2:15, we'll resume with the agenda item eels. So as I meant, we agreed on Monday, we would discuss eels at 2 o'clock on Thursday for a reason, and so we will start with eels agenda item 66 after the lunch break. During the lunch break, there will be a drafting group on the recommendations related to Ecuador in room 2. And in this afternoon at 5:30, the Mike Ettis subgroup will meet in room 9 at 5:30, as I said. And the agenda for this meeting is set out in information document 13. Bon appétit. Oh, there is one more housekeeping, excuse me.
Sorry, thank you. It's just a call from the interpreters to slow down, please. I know you have long notes and you're trying to rush through them, but they are not able to keep up. So do try to cut them in advance so that people can actually understand it also in French and Spanish or in the other languages. And also just to not touch the microphone. And I know your computer is in the way, but try to speak in front of a microphone as much as possible. Thank you.